Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Breakfast with Bobby. I am your co-host, Christina Bloom. I'm here with my co-host, Bobby Klebano. And today we have back the amazing Markus Kasunich, who is getting ready to make another pilgrimage to Wisconsin. So we're going to have a lot of fun stuff for you today. Take it away, Bobby.
So I hope that all of you recall who Marcus is. He's one of my favorite people. He's one of my favorite teachers. So just to give you an idea, this is an excerpt from a review, someone that wrote something about Marcus. And I felt that this was really pertinent because this kind of embodies who he is. Marcus is the furthest thing from an ordinary teacher, a healer, coach, or mentor. I have rarely met such a gifted individual who has created such a powerful platform for transformation. He integrates the psychological, interpersonal, spiritual, and his unbelievable personal experience into a practical coaching model. His programs have completely changed every relationship in my inner and outer life in ways I could never have dreamt possible. So to piggyback that a little bit, part of how we got to know each other was I have been in your IRAM class for almost a year, which has transformed my relationships. But because you are coming back here and you have a number of different events that are happening, one of them, I noticed you're doing a Kundalini awakening. Did I see that?
Yes.
I am really enamored with that. And
Ooh.
what a fun thing. If you don't know what that is, you probably should just go and feel it. You want to talk about that?
You may want to look it up first because that's
Yeah, look it
intense.
up.
That's intense. Yeah,
Yeah. But it's so cool.
it is cool. Very cool.
Yeah, that particular event, I'm not necessarily going to facilitate a Kundalini awakening, but I will talk about the esoteric background, what it is, how it affects your central nervous system. It's I mean, fundamentally, we're a giant energetic antenna with a body wrapped around it. I mean, if you look at the spine, it's at the back of the body, and the rib cage wraps around, and everything wraps around the spine, every in the central nervous system, in our entire consciousness. And in Eastern traditions, the Kundalini energy, the Sushumna that runs straight up the spine, is like the pinnacle of life force where we access consciousness. And because I teach meditation, and some of the meditation techniques I teach are all about activating the spinal energy. And a lot of people, when in the spiritual world, they'll say go inside. That's a very abstract term. But if you understand, going inside means going into the spine, accessing the life force energy that runs in that tube, up the dural tube in the center of the spine, and that current, and you start to access that. That's a very powerful way to activate a different and more aligned and maybe elevated energetic reality. Because once you have that kind of energetic reality activated, when we're talking about fifth dimension and living in a different state, you are living in a completely different reality, because you have more information that's accessing the subtle levels of consciousness. And when you're in that space and that's activated within you, or at least you have an understanding and you have a relationship with it, the way you navigate the world will be very different. So that specific event is about understanding the esoteric background of it, how it works, things you can do to connect to it, why it's even a thing, because it's not a thing anymore. It used to be a very powerful, regular, normalized thing in terms of spirituality. Now it's more of a pop culture thing, and I don't know if people really. It's also misunderstood. A lot of people don't
Yes.
understand what it is, how
Right.
it works. So I'm trying to dispel the myths, open up some information, give background, understand the context of what systems this comes from, because it comes from multiple systems and different systems from all over the world. Specifically, one of the biggest is from the Sanskrit tradition and the Hindu tradition, the Tibetan tradition. It's very big in terms of an activation of the full experience of your human energetic reality. So yeah, it'll be fun. It's a good event. It's a good event.
Well, I belong to a Facebook group about Kundalini awakening, and I am always surprised at how many people, first of all, belong to the group. But in
Mhm.
addition to that, people seem to try very hard. They don't know how to do it. They're confused as to what it is, and their explanation of what it looks like is very different than, of course, and I know everyone's experience on life is different. Uh, I know that when I was in the retreat that we had at your place, it was
Yeah.
very powerful. And I really didn't realize that it was a Kundalini awakening until I got home and then realized what had happened. But it was such a cool thing. And it's so peaceful and so beautiful. And, but I
It
know people are,
can be. It's not always that,
I'm sure.
it's not always that graceful.
No, that was not my
experience
experience.
was not my experience either. No, and then there's activations and then there's awakenings, because you can have many activations before there's a full Shiva Shakti awakening, where the current runs all the way up, and the feminine side of the energetic merges with the masculine, and then there's a very different. That's when you know you've kind of woke up into this different energetic experience that you're having. It's extremely powerful, and mine was not comfortable nor pleasant, and it happened over the course of about 10 years. But the big spontaneous thing was challenging. It was like an 11-day, laying in bed 11 days, no food, no water, having energy and current. I could smell the flesh burning in my body as this current was activating. It was very intense. My wife talks about it too, because her experience was also extremely intense. So not everybody it's graceful, but the activations, if and the thing is, if you have a scaffolding, if you have if you have sadhana, if you have an understanding of what's going on in your spiritual world, if you have some background, if you have some practices, it makes it easier. It not necessarily, but it can make it way smoother. So everything we did in the retreat was designed to activate that in a gentle way, so that when you do have those openings, and you have something to work with when those things happen. Because a lot of people, they happen spontaneously and they don't know what's going on.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
a lot of people end up taking drugs to subdue it. They'll try to shut it down, because there's no context for that in our mundane reality to talk about what it is. People don't understand it. So it can be spontaneous. You can't really make it happen, but you can work on the environment of your consciousness and create, like a rose. You can't make a rose open faster by yelling at it, right?
Right.
And you can't prompt it open. The rose opens when the rose is open, but you can invest in the atmosphere. You can invest in creating beautiful soil, making sure the weeds are pulled, giving the right nutrients. That's what spiritual sadhana is, creating the environment, so when that spontaneous thing arises, you're in a space, consciously, unconsciously, relatively, spiritually, to be able to understand how to work with it when it opens up.
So you mentioned that your experience in that was not incredibly soft and wonderful.
It was not.
How
Yeah,
did you
mine
know that
wasn't.
that's what it was? How did you know?
Well, it was kind of hard to avoid.
I'm
So
sorry. I'm laughing because I know what you're saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, first of all, people's like, how did it get activated? Well, I was living in an ashram at the time. I was living in a spiritual community, and I had been doing practices. We'd been meditating. We meditated 4 a.m. every morning, and in the evenings. It was like an ongoing deep meditation practice. But one of the things that most powerfully opens it, that people don't recognize, is devotion, because it's a self-love connection, because you have to be super available to yourself in a very powerful way. So devotion to self, to your practices, to the experience of what your interface is to consciousness, that's one of the things that kind of activated the environment for me. And then I got very ill, and I went into this intense space for 11 days where I was in bed, and I just had current pouring through my body. And it felt like, literally, it felt like there was like a hole in my head, and it was just, the current was driving in. And it was so painful in the beginning, because it's like being plugged into like a supercharged socket 150,000 times what your current energy is. So my system was overloaded, and took a little while. It took about 5 to 7 days for my system to get comfortable with the energy that was now activated in my body. And then as a result of that, I had visions, and perceptions opened up. But it was painful, and it was challenging. And like I said, I could smell the burning flesh when the current would come in. I could smell the flesh in my body burning. There was nothing burning physically, but that's the energetics of how intense this thing was. And then when it opened up, when it finally stabilized, I was a completely different person. like the way I functioned was totally different in terms of my relationship to the outer world and the inner world. So it's hard to miss it. It's not something that could happen and you're like, you didn't notice it in my particular case.
Yeah, I would like to share my experience because it's a
Please.
little bit different, but it's also very intense. I took a Sahaja yoga class, and it opened up in that class during a meditation.
Mm,
And that what I didn't understand, and there was a language barrier for sure when I took that class. I'm like, okay, I'm just following what everyone else is doing because I couldn't understand what the instructor was saying. So even if a warning was given, I didn't get it. And um, so uh, yeah, and to me, it felt like and there was a week between classes, right? So I didn't have any contact information for the person. Even if I did, I wouldn't have understood what she said. But it was like a week long. It was exhausting. I had to keep doing my world, right? I was a single mom.
mhm.
Can't stop doing that. Got to keep doing it. So I was going through my life. It's not like I had the option to stay in bed. And, but it was physically painful, particularly in the pelvic region. And it was almost like having a week long, nonstop, intense orgasm, which might sound really fun, but it is not. It's painful. And, at the end of that week, when I went back to class, I explained to her what was going on, and she helped me kind of back it off a little bit so I could function. But yeah, it totally changed my world. I mean, I couldn't smell the flesh burning, but I certainly could feel everything moving. I could hear better. I could see better. Like touch was almost painful to me.
Mhm.
It was just every sense was enhanced incredibly. And so, yeah, it's a little different experience than the one that you had, but it was very intense. And that was my first experience with Kundalini on any conscious level.
Yeah,
Perhaps,
it's a ride.
It
And
is.
and again, because there's a very little context in our world for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, what would happen if you went to a doctor and you just explained what had happened? They'd put you on meds.
Yeah.
right.
They'd be something like, or like you're having hot flashes, right? It's like, or it's menopause hot flashes or whatever for a lot of people, which I've seen people confuse that with Kundalini stuff that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, but again, like you said, your world changes because
It
you've
does.
just activated a subtle experience of your consciousness in a way that most people have no idea even exists. So of course your perception will be like you had. I had like everything was enhanced. And then so you typically, because it expands so much, because in the ecstasy of it, you get this big expansion, then your body has to kind of regulate and find the place where it's going to land. So usually get this huge explosion of this altered state, like she was talking about,
Yeah.
for a huge period of time, and then the body regulates and absorbs where it's going to be, and then you kind of find your regulating operating place, and then it kind of settles. But that ride is different for everyone. It looks
It
different for everyone.
is. And that's why I wanted to share my experience because it
Yeah.
is different for everyone. And Bobby had shared hers about how peaceful it was. I'm like, that mine was not peaceful.
Well,
Mine
maybe
was not peaceful. I could hear colors. Like I could, it was not peaceful. But it was opening and it was beautiful in retrospect, but going through it was challenging.
But Bobby, the other thing is because you have been doing practices, right? And
Mhm.
you've been preparing the environment of your consciousness for when something like this through grace that opens up, it can be far less painful. Mine was spontaneous, and like she said, I had no idea what was happening. Like it wasn't like
Yeah,
I had practices in place to be able to navigate what that was. Practices came after to navigate what had happened, not before. And so
same.
for some people, it's very spontaneous. And for some, that's why I always say personal relative sadhana and spiritual sadhana are very powerful things because it provides the scaffolding in your consciousness to be able to handle these huge awakenings that we have. And that's what happens with a lot of people. They have these powerful awakenings. They have no understanding. They have no practices. They have nothing that they're doing in order to kind of like work with it. And even if it's spontaneous, this stuff happens and then your world changes. And then you're like, then you have to start applying stuff that you never knew you had to apply before.
Right.
right. Maybe I didn't have a Kundalini awakening. Maybe I
Well,
just had
it,
this really
it
good
was
time at your retreat.
it sounds like it was an activation of like a lot of spinal energy that was activating, because trust me, like if it's a full awakening, it can be overwhelming. It's like she said, it has a lot of ecstasy in it, but that ecstasy, when people hear the word ecstasy, they think you're just in this pleasure space. But when you get ecstasy to the nth degree, it's almost painful. It's like that threshold of pain and pleasure all put together. So it's not necessarily like you're like blissed out, but you're also, I mean, try living like that
Yeah,
for a chunk of time, like where your system's
Mhm.
overloaded to expanding to such a place. It's not comfortable in the mundane world at all.
not at all. Not at all. I remember having difficulty putting sentences together. Like, I would try to talk to people and they're like, "What are you talking about? Like, you're not making any sense." And I'm like, "Man, am I stroking out? What's happening here?" But yeah, it was very, very intense. But I think also partly because you, Bobby, you went to a retreat looking
Mhm.
for that experience, looking for a spiritual experience. I was just meditating in a yoga class. Like, I had no idea that that was going to happen.
Well,
You know what's beautiful about that is a lot of people are like, how is it for some people it's spontaneous, and for some people they do practices to prepare themselves, and for some people it never happens? I think part of it is karmic, meaning things you've done in your past experiences or other realities have like, because you're a multidimensional being, right? So
Right.
if in other realities or different timelines or in past lives you've done a lot of this kind of work, there's a bleed over when you come back into the experience, because there's a memory in your consciousness of some of these things. And so it's kind of like a clock that's ready to open up when all of the factors are ready in this particular reality, and by divine timing or grace or whatever you call it, you have these experiences. A lot of people have these spiritual experiences spontaneously. It's because of stuff that's happened to them in their past experiences, and in this time around, the consciousness remembers.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's like
It's
that.
like, yeah,
It's like that kid who plays, like they get on the piano and they play a piano, and there's no way that a child could play the piano the way they're playing the piano. You know that there's some echo of memory that's playing out, because there's nothing logical or even possible that a child could sit and play it like a concerto the way they can at 5 or 3 or 4 or 5 years old, right? So I always say some of our talents are bleed overs from different experiences that are kind of are showing up artistically, spiritual tools and gifts. If you've done a lot of work in your past experience, it's likely to show up here, because the only thing you take with you on the other side is an evolved consciousness. You don't take anything else. So whatever you've done in this world will ripple out in the next round if you come back. I totally believe that.
I do
I've
too.
seen enough experiences of that now
Mhm.
to think that that's absolutely true.
I agree. I agree. I kind of call it like what you were explaining before you started talking about, the kids who can just play piano, but it's like we're spiritual sleeper cells.
Mm. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I'm
It,
writing that down in the dictionary.
all right, you
Spiritual
do that.
sleeper cells.
Spiritual sleeper cells. But it's like something activates us and something we already knew steps up.
Something you didn't even know you already knew.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Something latent in the cellular DNA consciousness in our, because the sophistication of what kind of beings we are is pretty remarkable.
It
And I
is.
mean, there's coded information inside of us just waiting for the right environments or the right catalyst to open a lot of that up. I mean, all of us are existing at this time, at certain time, knowing that there's all these energetic shifts going on in the world. And there's, like you said, there's a lot of dormant stuff inside of the consciousness of a lot of people who are alive at this point, who are just, it's just waiting for the right catalyst, spiritually, energetically, personally, psychologically, environmentally, to open this up. And then it seems spontaneous, but the question is it really spontaneous, or is it karma from past experiences? If you were talking to Indians from India, they would say it's definitely karmic. If you were talking to New Age people, they might call it spontaneous.
Yeah, and you had said that not everybody gets this, and I would say probably in Western civilization, fewer people get it because we're not as open generally. And I'm generalizing, this is not
Sure. Yeah.
specific, but, you know, we're not taught to be open to that type
Right.
of an energy. Like, you know, that's when people go to the doctor because they think there's something wrong with them.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, if I hadn't had some of the guidance, which is why a teacher is really powerful and having a mentor, because
Mhm.
when you have some of these openings happen and you have no idea what's going on, you want to talk to somebody who's had enough of these kind of experiences. You're like, help, what's going on? Otherwise, you end up at the doctor and they're like, what usually it's medication. They'll
Mhm.
Right.
medicate you,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Or a hospital room
Or a hospital
and
room or a
medication.
psych
Or,
ward.
or a rubber room. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Padded room. Yep.
I
That's what we are getting.
I worked in psychiatry for a while, and the psychiatrist that I worked for did we used to call him Sparky. Let's just say that. And he
Mm.
did the brain stuff, you know, where the shock wave stuff
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah. So yeah, we used to call him Sparky.
I'm
So,
telling you, I
so
worked at a psychiatric clinic for a while. I was working at the front desk, and I can tell you sometimes it was very difficult to tell the practitioners from the patients.
well,
Well, there's that. Yeah.
and I mean, there's quite, if you think about it, if you're working in that environment all day long, energetically, you're part of that world. This is why, I mean, this is why with a lot of practitioners and healers, I'm like, do you have clearing exercises? Do you do stuff to clear yourself after you work on people? Because it's in an energetic, you're in this energetic reality with this individual, and unconsciously you're going to take on stuff that is like, and it's going to be
Mhm.
catalytic for part of your growth. So I'm always working with empaths to say, listen, do you have tools and techniques to ground yourself, to clear yourself, to prepare yourself before you work on people? So it's remarkable to me how many people don't even prepare themselves before they're going to do this intense, intimate, energetic work with people.
And I think it's because they don't understand
They don't
what it's
necessarily have
going
the
to be.
tools.
They don't have the
Right.
tools to
Yeah,
understand what they're stepping into.
right.
Yeah.
And after
But
that,
this
then they
is
get in trouble, you know, and then they're searching for the solution
Yeah.
then
to
then there's
how
which
come it.
which is just the different pathway to get the information and the awakening on another level, right?
Mhm.
If you get into something, you step into something and you don't know what you got into and you're like, oh my God, what have you done? What is this? Then you're going to seek help. That's just the being's way of getting you to get deeper education and awareness about your own relationship with self, right? When it comes down to
Mhm.
it, this is why they don't have this anymore. Now we don't have initiation schools the way we used to in the cultures and the different cultures, and like in meditation. Well, we talked about this in terms of the discipline of slowly getting to where you're going with teachers and having a program and layers of initiation. Even in your experience of working with martial arts, it's the same thing. You can't just show up and at the top of the level and perform. You have to build the muscles and the systems and the way of engaging with that. That's the same thing for an energetic healer. That's the same
Yeah.
thing on the spiritual path. It's not I mean, we live in this instant gratification society that wants it all now, goes on Google's the information, but there's no real nurturing of that content. That's why those
Right.
mystery schools over the years were so powerful, because it would provide you in a safe, it would provide and help you in a safe way to prepare you to be in a place to receive some of those powerful activations that can happen.
And unfortunately, in today's society, we have to be careful when choosing mentors and teachers
Very true.
because there's a lot of fraudulent stuff going on in the spiritual community. And as we're moving through this ascension from, into the 5D ascension and the higher frequencies, those people are kind of falling through the cracks, and it's becoming more obvious, like who's doing what. But there's still a lot of fraud is the only word I can think of. Like,
Yeah.
Posturing,
Inauthentic.
fraud.
posturing, fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we already did a show on posturing, right? So,
Right.
Right.
yeah. So, we've already kind of put that warning out there, but I wanted to also state again, be careful who you choose as a mentor, as a teacher, get references, talk
Vet
to people
them.
you
You need to vet
trust,
them.
Yes.
vet them. Yes, absolutely. Vet them.
Watch what they
Don't
do, how they do it.
yeah, and don't just go to their Facebook page or their website and decide, "Oh yeah, this sounds good. I want to learn how to do that," without understanding whether or not that person actually is qualified to even do it themselves or teach.
Right.
Yeah. You want a teacher that's a living embodiment of what they're teaching.
Exactly.
If they're
So
not a living embodiment of it, then they're even if they understand the content, they're talking from their mind, not necessarily as a lived experience, which means they're not going to be able to teach it from all levels of their being.
Right. Right. It's kind of like a 20-year-old life coach.
Yes, we've had this discussion too.
Yes. Yeah, we have.
a lot of
20-year-old
questions went
life,
through my head there.
a 20-year-old life coach could life coach a 12-year-old, right?
Yes, right. Exactly. How to get through high school.
To get through high school.
Yeah.
So two things came to my mind when you were talking about about what we were just talking about. First of all, the posturing. Do you think that people out there know exactly what they're doing? I know that some people are just totally just on the outside skirts of trying to make people think that they're not nasty or deceitful. Do people know? I mean, or do they just think they know and then they posture themselves as an expert and go on with life thinking they're an expert? Is it all thought and action, or do you think people are really deceitful enough to what's going on in the world today with all of the psychic community posturing? Do you think
I'll let Christina start on this one.
Okay.
do you think it's conscious or unconscious?
I think it's
big
both.
question. It's a big question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think it's both. I know people who are very sincere, who really do want to help people, who probably have not had enough experience in what they're trying to do to actually really be helpful. Now I say that, but then, there's beginners and there's masters, and in between there are millions of different levels of knowledge, of experience. So I don't think that people have to be, and I don't think it's possible to be 100% enlightened and still be in a human body, right? So I don't think you have to get to that point before you start helping other people. But I do think that some people think that they're more advanced than they are, or that they know more than they do, or that they understand more than they do. I think that some of it's intentional. And I think a lot of it is lack of experience and lack of understanding that there's more to learn. Just because you can reach across the veil and talk to someone's loved ones doesn't mean that you necessarily have the training or the experience to process that message and bring it through your own filters in a clear way to give a message that's a clear, honest message, because we all have filters, right? So a really well-trained, whether it's a psychic, whether it's a healer, whether it's a teacher, a really well-trained one will be aware of their own filters and learn how to bypass them. Otherwise, you're just getting someone's interpretation of who they believe your loved one is sent down to you, which is why so many people walk away from those experiences unfulfilled, because they don't understand that that's how it works.
Yeah, I love the way you're talking about this, because for me, one of the reasons I was inspired to write the book that I did, which is all about conscious relationships, is because so many people in the spiritual world, even with these talents and siddhas that get developed, because they can be spontaneous, or they can be like tendencies that people have. Just because you have raw talent doesn't mean you have mastery, right?
Right.
I mean, that goes with anything, whether
Right.
that be like playing the cello, doing a painting, being a carpenter, or whatever. You could have this like latent talent within you that's undeveloped, but the talent also does not equate to maturity. So for me, seeing the lack of maturity in people's relationship to their spiritual awakening is one of the reasons I've spent a lot of time with people to understand your conditioning, which she's using, which she calls filters. Those filters will be the way you interpret all the experiences you have. So how many people out there in the spiritual world have these talents, and then they start cultivating the talent, but they don't do any inner work on themselves or any understand their own conditioning? So you can have the most profound spiritual awakening on the planet and have an infinitely immature relationship to it. Or you can have a completely misunderstood relationship to it, and then thinking that you get it, going out to teach. right?
Right.
And so I always say, if a teacher that you're working with hasn't done any work, doesn't have a teacher themselves or some kind of mentor, because I mean, you're constantly growing and learning as a teacher. So you want to have some place where you're accountable, and you haven't done any relative work on your ego structure, your understanding of your issues, where that's coming from, you're not likely to be as masterful as you would like to be, even with the talent accessed,
Right.
right? So we see, both of us have seen this enough times, and it's one of the
Yeah.
reasons I write the books I write, because the spiritual experiences, the experiences you have will be always filtered through your personality, your personality structure, your ego structure. So if you don't have an understanding of your own makeup, then there's a whole layer and depth of that experience that's not accessible to you,
Right.
or misunderstood completely, and then taught from that misunderstood place, which is more dangerous. I would agree with her. It's more dangerous for someone to think they know more than they do than someone who's humble enough to say, I don't get it. I don't really know that much. And I'm willing and open to learn. But the people who think they know more than they did, they cause more damage a lot of the times than
Right.
in this world than we've seen in different things. But again, that applies to anything. If you have a dentist who thinks they know, who knows postures more than they know, or a doctor, it's the same thing. It's no
Yeah,
different, right?
exactly. And in the psychic world, I would have to say that almost the people who you just described are possibly even more damaging than those who are outright fraudulent.
I
Yeah,
agree.
in some cases,
That's where I was going with the question
yeah,
initially.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
Yeah.
because they're kind of they drink their own Kool-Aid. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
right.
Yes,
Right.
they do.
Right. Well, the admittedly, the reason that you two are my mentors and my fabulous teachers is because of all of the classes and all of the education that I have. There's still a piece of me, the maturity about that. I know that I don't have all the pieces, and I think I would be doing someone a great disservice to go out and practice and not be able to finish the job in a complete way. And so it would actually enhance their life rather than hurt it. So when I need the experts, because I call on the two of you a lot,
Hmm.
that's where I go. There has to be someone, like you've said a number of times, Marcus. You have to have a mentor. You have to have someone bigger than you are and that knows more. But I'm smart enough and, of course, old enough to know better that I don't know. Don't know. The interesting thing is I'm the oldest person here on this call. So,
But
I
that
don't think
kind of
that
wisdom.
matters. I'm
No,
sorry.
I don't think
Go
so.
ahead,
Okay,
Marcus.
go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just going to say the age thing doesn't matter. It doesn't, because our souls don't know numbers.
right. Well, and Marcus, you mentioned something a little earlier about when the student, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing what I'm taking out of this, when the student doesn't know something, the universe is calling on you to expound on your knowledge. And that's where I am right now, expounding on some of my knowledge. But I also know that I'm learning some things or in the knowledge base that I'm into right now. The amount of people, the pool of people that know about it is kind of limited. And so I appreciate both of your expertises and your skill set because you both are incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. The more you get into the nuances and subtlety of your own consciousness, whether that be your relative experience of your ego structure, or the energetic experience, or the spiritual experience of your being, the more nuanced it becomes, the more it helps to have somebody who can kind of help guide through some of that stuff. I needed it. I still do. And it keeps you accountable, and because it gets really, really subtle,
Yeah,
and in some ways very, very, I mean, like, what a boundary looks like now for me 20 years after doing this work is much different than somebody who's starting out and drawing a boundary for the first time in their life. Like,
Right.
you become more refined, right? And if
yes,
you want to become refined, it's ideal to have a teacher, because that's the fastest route to keep you in check, because otherwise you're stumbling through the dark. In fact, 90% of the things I provide in my classes and all the events, when I'm coming back into the Midwest and doing these events, it's all of the stuff is designed based on the stuff I wish I had available to me when I was on my path.
right.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Right? That's
Right.
what we teach. We teach the things we wish we had when we were
Yes.
going through the things we see people going through. So we're able to say, listen, if I was where you are, like, this is the giving back part, right? I mean, like,
Right.
what I was where you are, this is what I wish somebody would have told me. It may not be the most pleasant thing, but it's the most honest and helpful. And a lot of cases, it can be confronting because you have to challenge your notions of your own conditioning and habits and beliefs around things, right? So, I mean, but it's powerful, and that's what keeps you growing and challenged. And you're being humble enough to recognize that you need you need assistance. I don't feel it's for me doing the kind of work I do. I won't. I think I will always have a teacher because I want to have someone who's keeping me accountable. And I think that's a good barometer for someone you're working with. If they don't have somebody who's keeping them in check, then I mean, aren't they hypocritical saying that they should work? You should work with them if they're not working with someone else. I don't know. It just seems to me like to be in integrity for me. If I'm going to ask people to work with me, then I should at least be a walking example of being able to work with somebody else. It
Right.
just that just seems that's an integrity issue for me. But
Right.
it's also understanding, having done this work for 25 years, that it's necessary if I want to get to where I want to get to.
Well, I think
Right.
that brings the discussion full circle about trusting someone and posturing into something that you are not qualified to do, and your ego has gotten the best of you, and you tell people you do. And that's why it's important to have the mentor and to keep you accountable. And is this really what I'm seeing? Is this really true? And so you have to have someone to help you discern that. And also your mentors need to be so trustable and so compassionate and forgiving that they don't jump on you, because then I certainly wouldn't talk to you anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So there's a bunch of many things going on here in terms of the relationships that you have with your mentors and with yourself.
Right.
And I mean, somebody who the other thing is this thing about, like you, like Christina said, you don't have to be enlightened to teach, but you have to be in integrity teaching where you have a level of integrated mastery.
Right.
So I am not going to teach certain elements of things that I haven't mastered myself. I don't teach anything
Right.
personally that I haven't actually pursued, learned, explored, and that I haven't integrated as a way of the way I function. And if I do offer a tool to somebody that I haven't tried before, I would say, this is a tool that I have not done, but somebody is ... You may want to try this and have a direct experience of it, see how it works for you. But I don't typically teach stuff that I haven't done because I want to, if you're in integrity, you're a living embodiment of what you're teaching. So therefore, if you're teaching it, there's some level, you're saying there's some level of mastery and integration at tech, hopefully. But that's, like you said, that's not all teachers, right?
Right.
And here's the thing, let's just assume you go out, you think you know more than you do. Very quickly, the universe will show you don't.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it will show everyone else that you don't too.
Yep. Right.
Yeah. It
So
always happens publicly for some reason. So,
Yes.
it,
yeah.
I think sometimes it has to, because of the level of humility that's required to get it. Sometimes people have to be shook,
Yep.
like, shaken, to be able to say, hey, listen, you're way out of your league,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
know, it's
Well,
like, I
Yeah.
remember the first time I was perform there was this, it was back in when I was in my 20s, and I was going to do the first time I ever performed live with a guitar. I've never, like, I'm not a real good musician, not a hugely good musician, but my friend and I were playing, and he wanted to perform at this open mic thing. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I remember thinking, wow, I mean, this is the first time. And I heard other people talking about, like, posturing, about how they play. And I was thinking to myself, I don't know anything. And getting up on stage and playing the first time with all of the hundreds of hours of practice that we did for this one song that we were going to perform was entirely different when you got behind the mic and you were actually doing it live. And it's humbling to recognize
yes.
how little you know when you're in the environment, and all of a sudden you got the lights and the people and all the people, your attention, and all of a sudden it being in tune and being able to sing the notes that you practice, maybe not quite as easy as it was when you were practicing it in your bedroom alone.
Right.
Exactly.
So it was humbling. So I think that's what
Yeah.
happens with people when they build their own story and their own narrative about what they think they know. Then they get out in public and they get confronted with questions and people asking things. Listen, if you can't articulate the teachings that you say you know, you got to question whether they're integrated. Right?
Right.
If you can't explain why things happen the way they do, or have some cognitive understanding I always question whether it's fully integrated. And integration requires direct experience. It requires understanding, and the marriage of those two things together comes from the wisdom of experience.
Yep. Exactly.
Very much so. Yeah.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of
Really
people out
does.
there who
Yeah.
like you said, the 20-year-old life coach goes out. Like, I mean, do you have the life experience to support what you say you're doing? Not a lot of people do.
No.
Or you
No.
take your Reiki class, right? And you work on 5 people and you're like, I know how to do Reiki. And I'm like, you worked on 5 people? I did Reiki for 4 years, working on hundreds of bodies in order to get to a place where I felt the level of integrated awareness enough to be able to feel like I was comfortable to do it outside in a public setting. So, I mean, again, a lot of people, they go on the internet, they get the information, they think they get it, but they have no direct experience. They have no wisdom about it, and they have nobody directing them. And so that can be very dangerous.
Yep. It can be absolutely. Absolutely, it can be. We have had, I at least, okay, so I've been doing this a long time, so have you.
Yeah.
And in different arenas, because I do like psychic fairs and whatever all over the country. And you can tell who knows what they're doing and who doesn't.
Mm.
You when I walk in the room, I can tell by the way people hold themselves. I can tell by the way that they're very nervous, or they set stuff up weird, or um, they hide behind their phone. But you can tell like who knows what they're doing and who doesn't. And yet there are some who come off as very confident, but their knowledge base is very limited. And I'm not saying that I know everything. I'm not saying that any of us know everything. But when someone comes to me with a question that I can't answer, I at least have enough integrity to say, I don't know, but let me check into it for you, or let me refer you to this person who I know knows. There's integrity is a huge part of maturity when you're a practitioner of any kind.
Agreed. That's a huge part. Integrity just means what you know on the inside matches what your actions are on the outside.
Exactly.
So, like if someone's posturing, they're not in integrity.
No, no.
It's kind of like asking someone for directions to some place that you think you know, and then you give them directions, and only to find out that they've ended up in a different place than the place that you gave them to go. Well,
Yeah,
this didn't turn out the way I thought it would.
Good analogy. Yeah.
How many times have you
Yeah.
sent someone to given them directions and they ended up in a place that was not where they were going in the first place? Might have been fun, and pretty, but really not where they were going.
right.
And they were
Not,
late to whatever meeting they were going to.
but a lot of this is around education and tools. Our society doesn't necessarily, like, for instance, in the emotional world, we don't really have a sophisticated emotional language as humans in our present culture, right? I mean, I work with people and trying to articulate their feelings. If you don't have the way, if you could feel it but not have the words to articulate it, that makes it more difficult to integrate and understand. That's the same as spiritual experiences. That's the same with your inner work. There's, like, again, so those tools and those maps, which is my thing, I'm always about helping people, give them the tools and the processes. Those things are really important because they help build the opportunity for you to have deeper experiences, which allows for integration. So I think part of it is an educational thing. There's not a lot of education, and again, then who you're getting taught from, like you said. Like, you can end up with somebody who thinks they know what they're doing, and they're leading you down a path, but again, like a garden path. But again, eventually that will all come up, and you will discover a more sophisticated, more refined way of learning things. I feel like if you're sincere in your process of investigation, you will suss out and discover and find the teachers that are in alignment with your level of sincerity if you really want to grow. But you have to be open. You have to be willing to explore. Like, I mean, right now I'm in Arizona. I have to interview doctors. Like, they're interviewing me and I'm interviewing them to get into, like, as I have to get a new doctor. I'm vetting them.
Yeah.
I'm vetting them. I'm going through and finding out if this doctor's alignment with my philosophies. Do I like his personality or her personality? Do I like the way they work? Do they seem like they have enough education and experience? Have I got good references from people who are working with them? Like, why wouldn't I do the same thing with my spiritual teachers?
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
I mean, we would vet a dentist or a doctor or a gynecologist or a psychologist. Why wouldn't we vet our spiritual teachers? I find it interesting. It's an interesting thing, but that's part of that maturity in terms of the relationship. But even if you don't have it, it will be revealed, right?
Right.
Eventually.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Eventually, not necessarily in a pleasant way, but you
Right.
will get the lesson, right?
Mhm.
Eventually. That's why when I come into town, when I come in to do stuff, I like to include events that cover all different areas of consciousness. There's going to be lectures about certain topics, like I'm doing that lecture on the Kundalini, doing another one on masculine and feminine, which I kind of sometimes choose the topics based on the theme of this trip. So the theme of the trip is going to be very much in the energetic world, about understanding masculine, feminine, Kundalini, energetic. So there's lectures, but there's also experiential things. Again, providing the tools and the experiences for people that I wish I had
Yeah.
in all different areas to cover all the different bodies: energetic, emotional, personal, experiential, psychological, all the stuff combined together, spiritual practices, sadhana. I mean, we just did a sadhana retreat here in Sedona, our last retreat last weekend. And again, those are practices are very different that I might teach in when I come on tour, because those practices are deep about sadhana work, which is all spiritual tools to deepen you into different aspects of your consciousness. Again, I like to give people access to all those different things because it's a holistic approach. It's not just one area. And inevitably, when you work in one area, you're going to create a catalyst and a ripple effect in all different parts of your consciousness. And all these things are going to open up. So when we were talking about when I do stuff, I like to do stuff that gives people all the different accesses, and then they can pick and choose based on where they are in their journey, what kind of experiences they can have. But you can't do that if you haven't done it for 20 or 30 years, right? You can't just show up one day at doing this for a year or two and like provide that kind of information. That comes on the basis of like our experiences. Christina and I have been doing this for over 20 years. So the things
Right.
that we're doing come from the wisdom of our mistakes as much as
Yes.
our learnings,
Oh,
right?
the mistakes. There are so many mistakes. I can't speak for you. I'm speaking for me.
Oh no, no,
But
this is
I mean, we all make mistakes. That's how we learn, right? So,
it's one of the fastest ways to learn.
yeah, and the most humbling way to learn.
Hmm.
Well, you can't learn how
Absolutely.
to swim unless you jump in the water.
Yeah, exactly.
You're gonna swallow some water. It's not gonna be it's not a smooth sailing. It's a little sloppy too as you're
Mhm.
learning and growing. I always say healing is sloppy. People are like, "Oh my God, it was so rough." I'm like, right, but that's if it was super graceful and smooth, you probably wouldn't ever access the far edge of your comfort zone. Of course, it's going to be sloppy and a little messy as you're learning, and that's where you have to have self-compassion in
Mhm.
terms of your process, and like you said, have enough humility to recognize, hey, I'm in process of self-refinement. I don't have all the answers, and that's why having a teacher who can help guide that is very powerful. It moves you faster. It
Right.
absolutely does, in my opinion. I mean, there's a reason why I've had a teacher since I've been 18. I will always have at least one, if not more, mentors in different areas, and not just in one area too. There's spiritual gurus that are my mentors, and then there's psychologists and healers, and people who work in different layers, because depending on what area of consciousness you're exploring, there's people who are masterful in different areas.
Mhm.
Christine is far more masterful in the psychic realm than I'll ever be, because she spent 20 years cultivating a refined relationship with that talent, that latent talent in her, that she's mastered it. I don't have that level of mastery in that area that she does. I would never even attempt to do the things that she does. Not the way she does them. Absolutely not. That's just knowing that's knowing what your area,
Yeah.
where you're masterful, and where you would align someone to someone else who's doing that kind of work, right? So that's part of being a good teacher too, is knowing what you can do, what you do well, and what you do not do well, and knowing constantly that you're in the process of learning and growing and refining and evolving just like everybody else.
Right.
And loving what
I
you do.
agree.
And if
I
you're,
love it.
Yes.
And yeah, and being in integrity with your own
Mhm.
your own
yep.
journey. But yeah, I think at this point in the journey, I don't have a choice. Like, it's people are like, could you choose something else? I'm like, it's a choiceless choice at this point.
Mhm.
Once you can't unring the bell. Once you've opened certain things up in your consciousness, now you're responsible to have to deal with your new awareness, which means you're probably going to have to show up differently. And a lot of people
Right.
don't understand that. They want it, and then they get it, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't recognize my whole life would have to change if I had this awareness or this visions or this understanding or this faculty evolved. Like, yeah, everything changes. You now have to navigate your world in a completely different way.
Right.
And I mean, you have to show up differently, especially if you have something opened or activated, like a Kundalini opening. You don't think that your world is going to be entirely different. You're going to have to learn different tools, different ways of being, a different way of relating to things. And that's now a journey when you open something up. So you can get what you ask for. Be careful what you ask for, because if you get it, it's going to require you to change.
Right.
It
Every
has
new
to.
level of your life requires a new version of you, and that's just the way that it works.
Whole new tool set.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, if you're not open to that peeling and unpeeling and peeling and unpeeling again and again and again, then the spiritual journey probably isn't a calling for you. It's more of a hobby,
Right.
right? And at
Right.
some point, like it's inevitably that you can't go back, and you wouldn't want to go back. So the only thing you could do is move forward and continue to realign the way you engage, understanding that change is the only constant in the universe. So if you're in this process of refinement, you're constantly going to be working and shifting the way you engage with self, deepening and new tools, right? It's like, like the tools you used the tools you used 20 years ago aren't going to be as effective as they are now. In
No.
fact,
Right.
they probably might be obsolete as your certain levels of consciousness require completely different kinds of tools.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah,
So again,
absolutely.
when you think about that, that's beautiful, because if people are offering things at different levels and different experience
Mhm.
levels and the teacher, the student always seeks the teacher at their own level, because they're going to be
Right.
aligned to what they're working on. So all teachers will inevitably have students at some level that they're working with. It's just about to be integrous about knowing where you're at. And you're better off to just to be cautious and to be careful and to be, I would say, respectful to the process in a very, because a lot of people aren't. They're cavalier and they're maverick. I don't test new stuff on my students. I test it on myself and learn and evolve those things and then it gets introduced only after I feel like there's some level of integration within me.
Yeah, that's really, I agree. It's very, very important. And then I think about things like I walk into a situation in someone's home where they're having difficulty with an angry spirit or, something like that, because I do go into doing that sort of thing. And I don't like the term exorcism. I'm not a priest. I'm not a minister, but I have had to come face to face with some kind of scary stuff. And in those moments, I'm learning on the job. I am my guides are right there teaching me on the job. Like there's no time to step back and call my mentor and say, "Oh, how do you handle
Exactly.
this situation?" Because maybe my mentor hasn't had that exact same situation, right? So I mean, and there are times where you have to learn on your feet too, and having the base that you're talking about, having the base of experiences
And the
gives you
tools.
something, and the tools gives you something to use. And sometimes the tools I have aren't adequate. Sometimes I have to come up with new tools or have to reach out
Download.
to download it and fast. Yeah,
And you can't
exactly.
Google it, by the
You
way.
can't Google it. Not that kind of download.
No, not that kind of download. Nope.
Exactly.
But having that solid base is so important, because when I was new doing this, I wasn't walking into those situations because I wasn't prepared for them.
Yeah.
Right.
I was protected from that, so what, because you and I do some things similar and other things that are nowhere near similar to one another, there is the learning on the job there, and I think you probably do that too to some degree, right? I mean, when you're dealing with people, don't you sometimes come into something that you've never encountered before, or a situation that somebody has that is new to you?
Absolutely. There's always, I mean, that's part of the process of continuing to do the work, the learning. But
Right.
again, because you have someone to talk to as a teacher, so you can field information if you need
Hmm.
to, if you have the basis of your own understanding and own inner work, then at the very best, someone's like, "Are you confident in your abilities?" I'm like, "No, I'm more confident in my ability to respond to whatever happens given my background, and to know that I will work it out. And sometimes I have to take that in and work it out. And sometimes it's on the job. But again, if you're in that position where you've already cultivated that internal
Right.
scaffolding,
Mhm.
psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, you're more apt to be prepared when there's a new environment that you have to engage with, because you have the wisdom of your experiences to draw from,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
And I
Exactly.
100% believe that,
Yeah.
because I've seen people in environments and I can see them go haywire because they've never seen what's going on. But I'm like, okay, I haven't seen this, but we've dealt with a zillion things that are like this. Okay, you have a process on how to engage with it.
Right.
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 Transferable skills.
Right.
Yeah,
And I also have a very strong relationship with my spirit guides that I've cultivated. So,
absolutely.
when I'm in a situation where I see something I've never seen before, I can go, okay, guides, guide.
Help me out. Right.
Wow.
Could really use your guidance now. And they always step forward. They always step forward for that. So,
Which comes from her 20 plus years of cultivating that relationship. That's not
yes,
something that she just on a Tuesday decided she was going to be connected to her spirit guides. That
right,
comes from years and years of communication and communion and purification, to be a deeper channel for that connection,
right,
and to be able to access your own inner knowing aligned with all the messaging. I mean, like we say, connect, but there's so much that goes into that from the wisdom of the experience that's around it. And again, when you're connecting at 20 years of doing that, that's a very different connection than somebody who's never done it before.
right,
Right.
exactly,
So do you
exactly.
guys teach that? Do you teach
I do,
getting to know your guides? Do you?
I
Yeah,
do.
I teach variations. We
Mhm.
both teach variations of
Yes,
again, I'm always working on the environment. How do you cultivate the internal environment that
mhm,
puts you in the right position to be able to support that kind of growth? And that's why I always say relative sadhana and spiritual sadhana. Spiritual sadhana is those spiritual and practices that deepen you into the essence of who you are, and relative sadhana is dealing with all your conditioning. I feel like the combination of those two things put together puts you into a really powerful position to be able to activate, learn, and cultivate the tools of some of these experiences and these skills. So yeah,
right,
you can learn connection, but
mhm.
again, she can give you tools, but it really also comes with your sincerity of how you approach it too.
And it comes with practice,
Practice, practice,
because
practice,
it
practice.
is a relationship.
Yeah,
When I can introduce you to your spirit guides, but if you don't follow that up with actively engaging with them, all you have is names, basically. You
If
know
you
what
even
I'm
have
saying,
that.
though? But
but, but
that's true, right? If you even have that. But if you don't actively cultivate that relationship, then it's not going to be there. It's like meeting somebody once for coffee and 2 years later calling them to pick you up at the police station, you know? It just doesn't work that way. You have to call you
I'm
have to
writing that
cultivate
down too.
you have to cultivate the relationships. And I introduce a lot of people to their spirit guides, but if they don't cultivate that relationship afterwards by actually engaging with their spirit guides intentionally, cognitively, then there's nothing that I can do to make that relationship work.
that's
Well,
well said. I agree with that 100%. 100%.
I think
1,000%.
I think people sometimes have a very different perception of what their spirit guides do and how they operate
Hmm.
and the relationship that they have. They think that they're sort of an employee or they're only aligned to them. And it's a relationship that you have to cultivate. And depending on your disposition, you certainly don't want to always constantly ask them for stuff.
Right,
It's not that type of thing, but you have to build it just like any other relationship that you have in your life. You
right,
certainly wouldn't walk in and start shouting orders to somebody or, be curt and give them some kind of, orders about what you want done.
right,
It's a relationship. You have to figure that out and how to work with it.
I think like every human being has a lexicon of how your inner world communicates with you. And you have to learn what your own inner language looks like. The way my inner language looks is developed from practice over the years of understanding how my beingness communicates to me, what symbols, what metaphors, what it looks like, what it feels like in the body, what kind of questions create what kind of responses. Every human being has to discover their own personal language with their beingness.
Mm-hmm.
And when Christine is saying, like, listen, she can introduce you to the experience of accessing some of these interfaces that connect you to the divine. But if you don't cultivate a language and you don't cultivate how you communicate with these different aspects of your consciousness, then how are you going to ever develop an intimate relationship with them? And then when, like you said, when you need them to be available, how do you be able to connect in a way that's authentic and real and efficient? Let's be clear, because I mean, no practice means you're not going to be efficient in your connection to self, and you're not going to even know how the communications are happening. So I always encourage people that part of this process is learning your inner language with self, how you communicate, how those messages come to you, what it looks like, what form they take, comes from experience, comes from practice, and it comes from trial and error. But once you understand that lexicon of idea, that lexicon of communication, whatever that is, I'm using that term, but like it could be a lot of things. That's when you become more masterful and more nuanced in your relationship to these aspects of your being. Right. But again, you can't, like you said, you can't go a weekend course. She introduces you to this whole opening. She rings the bell for you. You open up this whole world inside of you. Then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm good. No, now you have to go in there and you have to develop the relate. And this is like any relationship. That's the same thing. If you were dating somebody, you have to learn each other's moods and modes and communication. It's the same thing. So if you're not invested in that process, if it's not such a driving, burning part of you that wants that, then it'll be a hobby. It won't be a calling, which is okay too, by the way. But call it what it is. It's not a calling. It's a hobby. For me, that's when it's a choiceless choice, is when it's a calling. You don't have a choice. If you couldn't not do this, right? That's different.
Yeah.
But everyone has that ability, I think. And again, I think, like, people are like, well, what is it supposed to look like? What does it mean? I'm like, part of that is going to be completely determined by your own deepening in that experience. And if you don't do that, how can you get more nuanced? How can you go more sophisticated? How can you be more refined? So I agree with her that, like, that communication, that cultivation of that inner world, that language, that way, this is no different than how your psychology works with you, how your conditioning works, how your relationship to consciousness works, your relationship to spirit, to energies, to different realities. All of it's built in that whole world of practicing and deepening in the languaging and the way you communicate with self. We're such a sophisticated being. Like, human beings are super sophisticated and really, really multidimensional. So there's so much to learn at the potential we have as beings, right? I mean, we've only scratched the surface, really and truly.
Right. Exactly. We are well over time.
Are we?
No surprise there. No surprise there. But Markus, how can people get a hold of you or see your schedule for when you're in Wisconsin or
the dates?
or anywhere else? Yeah.
I'm going to be in Wisconsin from the 6th of November to the 19th of November. On my website, there's a tab called events, and there's some individual events listed on there, but the entire schedule of events is going to be there. And I'll give you the link so you can put it in the
Perfect.
chat box for this. But yeah, I'll be in town, and there's at least 9 or 10 events, all different kinds, and there's a lot of private sessions available as well. I usually do my tour, and it's usually about 2 weeks that I'm in the area, and I kind of try to cover all those different things we talked about, offer the different things, and all the personal stuff as well, in terms of people getting, if they want to have that personal, it will either include body work, it can include counseling. For me, I have like a toolbox. So when an individual comes for a session, it's about what they're asking for. It's about opening the toolbox and figuring out what tool is going to work for what they have going on. So people are like, well, what does it look like? And I'm like, well, it can look like this, it can look like that. We'll draw on the toolbox of body work and all the different tools there, as well as counseling and going deep into your psychology and your spiritual world, putting all that together to create an opportunity for people to kind of like basically progress in their process, right? Or go through some kind of insight. So that's all going to be happening. I'm looking forward to. I always like coming. This is my last trip of the year in your area until at least February. So we'll see how it goes. I'm the Midwest has always been a very interesting place to visit and do this kind of work.
It's an interesting place to live too. Um,
And you're finishing up the
Anyway.
IRAM class, correct?
Yeah, I think there'll be one more. We have one class finishing up this, and then we're going to start up a new round of the class in the new year, 2025, at some point. Still working on the details of all that.
Good.
Awesome. Well, hey, everybody, thank you so much for jumping in on this intense, deep conversation. You know, we always bring Markus along when we want to dive into rabbit holes. So, yeah.
And it all started with the Kundalini. Who knew?
It all started with the Kundalini.
Thanks a lot for coming, everybody. Thank you so much. Make sure that you visit Markus's website, markuskasunich.com. Take a look at the schedule, sign up for some stuff, and get a hold of Christina's schedule as well to see if where she is all around the state or states. She's got about 5 events coming up within this next weekend, right?
This weekend, I have 4 separate events, right?
Yes.
So I will be at a private event tonight. It's a corporate event. And then tomorrow, I am in Baraboo with MetaParapro and Beyond the Veil. They're switching names, so I have to say both of them. That will be at American, but by the time this posts, all of this weekend will be over. So more events coming up in November, and I am also open to doing a lot of private parties in December. So spruce up your corporate events, man. Hire me to come and do a reading for your people.
They're both very, very talented individuals. So take care, everyone. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and have a great weekend.
All right. And before
Happy-
you do that, subscribe.
Gosh, ring the bell.
Ring the notification bell so you get notified when we post a new episode, and like us.
Share with your friends.
Share. Yeah. Support us in the work that we're doing so we can continue to support you. All right,
Take care.
everyone.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you.